I'll stay clear of that.
John, I'm ready to go now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for attending and welcome. And please start this second panel on our inquiry into persistent absence and support for disadvantaged students. Pleased to welcome in the room Nathan Persaud, Programmes Director for the School of Hard Knocks. You're very welcome. And online, I think we have Jonathan Pauley, the 11 Plus Education Manager for City Inspires. Thank you for joining us. I guess first question, a nice open one. Why do sports-based activities help pupils' engagement with education? It's fairly obvious, and anecdotally they do. But can you give us some hard evidence as to why that should be the case? Nathan, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just start by kind of making a distinction between sports-based activities and targeted sporting interventions. The latter would have a very deliberate use of sport and also have an interpersonal element. But I would summarise the effects in kind of three main ways. So there's some physiological effects of sports-based interventions. So you've got that initial endorphin rush that we all know about. Sport makes you feel happy. So immediately there's this sense of fun and engagement for young people. We find young people are very much in the moment. So again, sport provides that environment with that endorphin rush as well, that very direct, quick feedback. And we'd find, just looking at that effect, if you spoke to young people at the start and the end of the session about their mood, all of them would say their mood and that their feelings would improve over that. So it's very much like, in that endorphin effect, very much like a kind of paracetamol for a headache. It's a really good antidote to low mood and mild anxiety. The other thing that we're really interested in is this concept of neuroplasticity. So essentially after exercise, the brain is more malleable. It's more open to new ideas, new ways of thinking. So if you've got young people in a very fixed mindset and quite a negative place, exercise naturally helps them think differently, and we couple that with workshops to help that. And I think it's no accident for us that we receive most of our safeguarding disclosures alongside the pitch, where young people have kind of just exercised. Then there's several emotional reasons why sports work so well. So it's completely novel a lot of the time in the way that good providers do it. So it feels different to school for young people straight away. It feels like something exciting and different. One of the most important things is it provides probably the only space for young people to practice skills around resilience. So you can't just talk about resilience in the classroom and in workshops. You need to give young people an opportunity to practice skills like anger management, for example, in a real-time setting where they're getting immediate feedback and practicing those elements. And then the other emotional part is really key, but it's in the relationships that sport allows the practitioner to form with the young person. We find that because we're not within the school system, our relationships have a slightly different power balance, and we can build trust and rapport through sport really well. And then finally, there's a couple of kind of social aspects to it. So every sport has a set of expected behaviours, cultures, values. So we use rugby. So you can use sport as a vehicle to teach young people new types of behaviours and explore new values. So we use rugby, for example, to talk about the power of team and the fact that you have to be successful in your aim, you have to work as part of that team. Only one person can speak to the referee. There's that respect for authority that's in a different context to what they're used to. And then finally, it encourages peer bonds. So we get pupils making friends because we mix year groups from outside their year groups that they then take through to the rest of the school. So in all, we feel that sport is in a unique position to meet a variety of needs, even when the needs in that cohort can be completely different.
Yeah, just before I bring in Flick, and also come to you, Jonathan, on screen, but how does that work for the children, I guess, who don't consider themselves sporty? We heard earlier some of the concerns around girls not necessarily being traditionally attracted to sporting activities in the holidays as much as boys, but also speaking as one of those boys at school who's terrified of sport, as I suspect there are a lot of people in this place who are. How do you make sure that you can engage those children that are perhaps less physically able?
That's part of why it's so powerful, because you are engaging them and you are suddenly making them feel successful at something that they previously felt unsuccessful at. So if you have that transformation for them in sport, you can liken it to other areas of their life. So we talk about growth mindset. So unless you demonstrate growth mindset in action, so you can show them that, okay, if you do 13 weeks of rugby, you'll start to see a really significant improvement, and even if you hated it to start off with, but if you try and you engage in it, so pupils feel a sense of confidence and achievement that they can take into other areas of their school life, because they can see that something they didn't like and were unsuccessful at, if they put some concerted effort in, are better at.
Jonathan, anything to add? I think you're on mute still.
Great start. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, we obviously come across a lot of students who aren't interested in sport yet still require support to obviously increase the level of engagement within education. And we find all students enjoy the sense of leadership and achievement. So if we can find roles within sport, within football, that don't necessarily mean they're playing, but they are still actively involved and making a difference, they become part of that cohort, group or team, and then the more that sort of success is shared, the more they want to get involved, to eventually hopefully wanting to get involved in most aspects really. But it's also at that time of, if they're doing a leadership activity, building relationships with each individual coach to then allow them to develop all of these skills that we're talking about in terms of, the resilience, the teamwork, the communication, the confidence skills. They've got a sort of platform to achieve, even though they're not involved directly in the session. So we encourage students who aren't particularly football interested to join the programme and really want to work with them to ensure that they are benefiting.
Thank you. Flick.
Yeah, well, unlike you, Robin, I was in all the teams, and if I had it my way, I would have an hour every day for compulsory sport. But I know that there are various children that don't like sport, as we mentioned. Have you looked at all the ways of including? So Robin might be interested more in dance or something like that, and that is part of it, but part of sport. But it's always said to me, not everybody likes sport, so I get it, I suppose. But we're talking about absence here, and do you think that creating more wide varieties of sports within schools, and you heard that I'm very keen on the extended school day as well, do you think that would help with absence and encourage children to come into school rather than stay away?
Yes, I think it's if you've engaged pupils in that sporting activity, and it's not just around, it's very different to taking part in sport for technical excellence. It's taking part in sport for fun and for enjoyment initially. So we've found that we've improved attendance and that some pupils only attend school on days that we're running things. And ultimately, really, that comes down to the relationships they have with the staff, because their needs are being met in one way or another by the staff that are delivering that programme. And our staff in a special position to not be a teacher, not be a friend, but sit within that as a mentor, and help them kind of explore their relationship with school as well. So the sport is the vehicle to enable that relationship to happen.
Yeah, and Jonathan, your views on getting children in from, because of sports activities?
Yeah, we encourage, so at the start of each programme we'll find youth voice in each of our groups to ensure that this is not just a football programme, this is an engagement programme. So if there are students who are interested in other sports, we will find time to deliver those sports to give those individuals a chance to succeed. So there's a lot of different sports delivered as part of our programmes, because obviously everybody's not just involved or interested in football, but they've got a chance to sort of succeed in whatever they look to do. And again, it's all sort of indirectly working towards developing a relationship with a trusting adult who's able to work on skills that they need to re-engage them in education. So we're using sport for teamwork, confidence, to increase all those pro-social behaviours that they indirectly don't know they're working on, but sport's driving that to benefit them and their school, really.
How would you try and encourage people like Robin to actually...
It's never too late.
It's never too late. To actually to encourage them to try it out in the first place, because there are lots of children that are disengaged from school who might be brilliant footballers, rugby players, or whatever, but are just not coming to school. But actually, those are the pupils really that need to have at least a trial out to see whether that's something for them.
Yeah, I mean, in the first instance, like I said, that it's something that feels very different to school. So we run a 3-year programme, but in the first year, for year 9s or year 8s, the activity takes place during lesson time. So they can either spend time with us or they can go to their lesson, and that's their choice. So that's really how we initially engage pupils, because generally they're up for trying us as an alternative to going to their normal lesson. But I think, like Jonathan was saying, we have to listen to the young people part of the programme. We can't, if we run something they don't like and they're not engaged with, it completely fails.
Right, okay.
So that sometimes means there's minor adjustments that are made for specific groups. I know with one group that really hated rugby that we had a few years ago. They played this weird hybrid of football rugby where there was a rugby ball used for 5 minutes and then the football swapped in for 5 minutes, and it was this kind of unique sport. So, and that was theirs. That was something they created. We also find that young people like different levels of physical contact, so we don't really teach full contact rugby until the second term. But that's something that some young people absolutely really love, and at the opposite end some don't. So we have to find ways of delivering a session where both of those can kind of engage and take part effectively.
Thank you. Quick in.
I suppose one of the things I'm particularly interested in, because I like all sport. I wasn't great at any particular sport, but I like all sport. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, Jonathan, have you noticed any particular changes in attitudes, particularly amongst girls towards football, since the success of the England team in the European Championship and the greater coverage on TV of the women's professional game now?
Like you, I'm not great at sport, but I love all of them, so familiar with that. Absolutely, that the change, we really drove that, because we saw that as an opportunity to really engage those who just found an interest from just watching it on TV and seeing the success that could bring. So we introduced more female-only programmes and mixed-gender programmes, and from that, the sort of engagement with girls has significantly increased. And I feel not just that, I feel especially at secondary level, what puts some girls off is the negativity that comes from boys, potentially, like obviously the typical comments that can come, whereas the football team has represented themselves, the country and all of the girls so well that negativity has drifted slightly. So they're able to feel that sense of, actually, we can do this, and the football team have shown we can do this, and we're still working on the back of that in keeping that level of engagement up because of the benefits that we've seen from it.
I think it's really interesting, because I think the television coverage in particular, but also the success of the national team, has kind of driven interest and growth in terms of activity within girls and women's sport to a level that hadn't been anticipated probably for another decade. So and of course, if that then helps in engagement in sport and educational programmes, that's all got to be grist to the mill and for the good.
Exactly that. We've had such demand, schools coming directly to me and other staff in terms of saying, can you deliver a girls-only extracurricular activity, which just wasn't happening within football. And we're trying to do that. And at some points you can actually stretch that far, which shows how much of a need there is with girls from all ethnic backgrounds, which again is breaking down cultural barriers, which is really, really special. And yeah, like I say, we're just trying to carry the momentum of that, and hopefully the England football team keep being successful to allow that work to continue.
Thank you very much.
Andrew.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So we're obviously focusing on school attendance, and we haven't come up with a huge amount of evidence that clearly demonstrates that sports-based activities improve school attendance, and Flick's touched upon it already. Are there some large programmes or coordinating bodies that can enable you to gather that evidence together?
Yeah, so we're part of the Sport for Development Coalition, which has about 400 members. So that is one of their priorities, is to help smaller organisations like us all come together and pool our evidence to create a larger body. But on the ground for us, that's obviously not a day-to-day priority, and it's quite hard to fit in with our resource, but they would be someone who's kind of taking that forward.
And what have they come up with so far?
So far they've generated like a collective evaluation tool, so to try and agree on a common kind of outcome framework. And then I think they've actually in reality come up with just a load of other actions that need to happen in order to make that work, because we've all found that we've got competing ways of measuring. There's overlapping outcomes, but there's also additional outcomes and priorities. So that's the biggest challenge, is to kind of bring all that evidence together, really.
And have those organisations tried their best to make sure that that's not overly bureaucratic or complicated? Because I mean, you've got people who really want to work with young people and help them play sport, not spend their time filling in forms.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's one of the challenges really with impact measurement at this level. That we collect terminal or biannual data, but you can't use really more than a couple of scales with a young person per term. It's just a complete kind of turn off. And we do that by phone as well, like pitch side, but that is a challenge for the sector as a whole. So there's a whole raft of things you could measure, and that we are as a sector changing, but we each individually have to choose probably one or two things to focus on measurement on because of that reason.
And is school attendance one of those? Does it tend to be one of those? And are there ways to either make that more of a focus, or indeed do you think it should be one of the premier focuses?
So I don't think it's a predominant focus at the moment. I think it's almost like a byproduct of some of the other priorities. So for us, our big drive is really around pupil well-being and pupil behaviour, like outward behaviour in terms of how the school sees it. But we see that if we do those things well, that attendance will then improve. Yeah. And I think that's probably similar for a lot of programmes I know, where they may focus on academic attainment or have another priority that they find if they meet that attendance improves.
I mean, it seems obvious that discipline, having more enthusiasm, being focused on a team, working together would improve attendance, because it's just generally improving behaviour, of which attendance is a component. But is that a very strong correlation, or is that just an assumption everybody makes?
No, I don't think so. We did used to improve. So pre-COVID, we used to measure attendance from the school's data, and we had really good data on that. So between 70 and 100% in some cohorts. But we actually stopped measuring attendance, partly because it was quite high, and we didn't feel it was something that we were directly trying to change. We wanted to focus on the outcomes that we were kind of directly trying to change with our measurement. Yeah. I think there is evidence there, but it's not just about behaviour. It's also about the pupils and their families' relationships with the school. Yeah. So if their behaviour is better, if they're happier in school, then that interaction with their family and with their parents becomes a more positive one rather than a negative one. And then attendance improves, because the families and the parents themselves may not have a problem with the school as such.
Good, thank you. So, Jonathan, similar sort of issues just for you to address. You heard all what I had to say there, just really your views on data gathering, the benefits of that, the disbenefits of that, but also the connections between a focus on school attendance and the link between better behaviour, getting into a team spirit, and school attendance.
Yeah. So firstly, the attendance piece is a high priority of ours, because it's a high priority for schools now. And since COVID, the attendance figures have dropped and the motivation levels have dropped. The frustrating one is COVID, because we're trying to compare data from previous years, which isn't as clear really because of COVID data. But when we've looked from like last year to part this year, we're seeing significant increases in students who weren't part of sports-based provisions with ours, which is City Inspires. So last year they weren't involved compared to this year being involved, which will be finalised at the end of the year, but we did it mid-year. There's a significant increase of between 4 and 6% from what I've looked at just this morning, which shows it's a big push for us. We have to get students into school, and as was mentioned before, for some of our provision, it might be the only day of the week that a student attends school, so that's a 20% difference from where would they be for that day, at home or just not engaging in positive activity. So it's certainly something we really want to focus on, and ours is a Premier League partly Premier League funded programme, and it's a priority for the Premier League as well in terms of looking at attendance and risk of exclusion, etc., and making sure that young people stay on the right path as much as they can. So yeah, I think the more resource that organisations get, which is increasing year on year, the more time and capacity we've got to gather this evidence, which is absolutely vital. It's not until you come at the end of the academic year and realise, like, this is the evidence that we need to get. We all know it works, but we've got to put it in front of head teachers, academy trusts and other people to make sure they know the value of what we offer. So yeah, that's what I'd say about the attendance focus.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ian?
Nathan, could you give a brief overview of the School of Hard Knocks programme for schools and describe what impact the programme has had on improving school attendance? I mean, you've kind of alluded to it. Could you flesh that out, please?
Yeah, sure. So it's a 3-year programme. It's a long-term intervention, typically starting year 9, sometimes year 8, but going all the way through to year 11. So we have 3 staff, two coaches, and then a behaviour specialist that deliver 3 components to the programme. So about an hour of rugby, an hour of a group workshop, and then one-to-one sessions for the pupils. And really the aims are to enhance well-being, but also the 5 C's. So this is developed by Loughborough University. So we look at communication, commitment, confidence, control, and then finally cohesion, which is that team element I talked about, and that we moved away from schools' measurement of or definition of what good and bad behaviour is to our own kind of specific measure of behaviour. So we work then to form the pupils as a rugby team. They play fixtures against our other partner schools, so they've got a shared kind of purpose and ethos. But over time, I've said it a few times, but they've developed relationships with either the coach or the behaviour specialist. That becomes a trusted adult for them, and then we work really closely with the school safeguarding teams to with any of the disclosures and the information that the pupils pass on, but also with things around attendance to ensure that the pupil gets the support they need outside of our time. So we're very clear about what our role is and what our intervention is. In terms of attendance, I kind of said before, I still see that we're in a kind of we still have a strong effect from COVID, and that we're almost in a unique kind of era. It's really, like Jonathan said, a really good point. It's impossible to compare. But leading up to COVID, we stopped measuring attendance, like I said, because we had a really strong effect on attendance. Like I said, typically between 70 and 100% in various cohorts. And because it was so strong, we were looking at other areas that we could measure, and we didn't think it was a particular issue, partly because attendance is a symptom of behaviour and unmet needs, essentially. Because we felt that we were working more on that level of the pupil meeting their needs in school, that's where we focused our impact measurement. We did, ahead of this, just did a head count, because we have a lot of anecdotal evidence from currently that pupils, either by choice or via arrangement at school, only attend school on School of Hard Knocks days. And we think around 20 to 25% of our 1,700 pupils only attend school because of School of Hard Knocks, or that School of Hard Knocks plays a significant part in their attending school. And one of the reasons that might be is, so say if pupils are suspended, as long as it's safe for them to return to the premises, they can take part in School of Hard Knocks and not mainstream school, and that's something separate from the school, so they're eligible to sort of take part even they're suspended. So it's really positive for their onward attendance after that suspension is finished, that they've actually come to something on school site.
Right. Okay. And you've mentioned there that most of the pupils you see only come in on the days they have the programme. So would you say the programme has a continuing impact in improving overall school attendance beyond the programme itself?
Yeah, for those that it's an issue for, so for us it is around a quarter or a fifth, but for those that it's an issue for, because if you're helping them with the issues that's preventing them attend school in the first place, then, and we're doing this over 3 years as well, so you might have people that, a lot of this is down as well to external problems at home, which undermine a lot of what we're trying to do and what the school's trying to do. So if they go through a poor period at home again, then we might find their attendance drops again. But that's the beauty of having a 3-year intervention, that they know that we're still there, that even if they're having a bad time at home, they don't feel like school is overwhelming for them. They can come and still see their the staff members on the day and not feel so overwhelmed by going through a kind of the rest of the school thing. So it's about long-term support. So yes, it does, but that's only possible through doing that over a long period of time, where we started initially, I think, as doing a 10-week pilot, and thought it's definitely not enough to make any kind of impact on behaviour or attendance.
Thanks. And Jonathan, you mentioned earlier, about the Premier League's focus on attendance. Could you give a brief overview of the City Inspires programme and describe what impact the programme has had on improving school attendance? And I know that you mentioned it's difficult to compare because of the COVID statistics.
Yeah, so City Inspires is partnered with the Premier League, and it's to use Manchester City and the Premier League to work with young people who are at risk of not fulfilling the potential, is the line that we use, and support them throughout their education process, give them sort of the tools that they need to succeed, such as the confidence, attitude and pro-social behaviours. So predominantly our coaches will work with a group of 15 students 1 day a week for the full academic year. Different organisations or different football foundations will do it differently. So, but we pride ourselves on that model of, as was just said, giving ourselves the time throughout the academic year to really build that relationship and that element of trust with young people. A lot of programmes will go on for 12 weeks, but we just found that didn't give us enough time to really embed sustained change. So our coaches will work with a group of 15 young people, depending on the needs of the group. So they'll spend 2.5 hours in the classroom in the morning, delivering a football-based qualification or some sort of PSHE topic related to their community, school or area that will benefit them socially. And then they will take an hour and a half in the afternoon doing a sports-based activity where they're developing all those pro-social behaviours that we talked about earlier. And again, linking to sort of the reason why it's a year-long change is if we come across that student who only turns up for City Inspires, that's not the sort of goal then. Yes, first 2 or 3 months we work with that student in terms of developing the trust, but once we know that they will attend every City Inspires day, we need to then push them to attending, the day before or the day after, so that their attendance continues to increase and the level of sort of appreciation to the school and to what we're offering increases, and that's shown in their education. What usually happens with what we do is there are students outside of the group who are really keen to get involved, so we use those as pushing what we do and also promoting to the students who are involved that there are young people who would love this opportunity. So it's obviously on them to make the most of it and show their appreciation. Doesn't work all the time, but predominantly most of them, don't want to lose that opportunity that's so unique and that a lot of schools don't have the option to get. So then that, as a result, without having to do too much as a coach, benefits their sort of attendance because they know they need to, show that appreciation by, enhancing in other areas of school, one being attendance.
I mean, I suppose I'm a football fan myself. I support Newcastle and Newcastle Foundation and have similar programs, But I'm just wondering, do you think it has any particular impact from your perspective, the fact that you're actually working for a very successful football club at the moment?
Yeah, it's different across the area, and we have to use that, and we really have to use that. And every football club of that stature, Newcastle being one of them, has to use that pull that football clubs have to benefit young people. And we're so passionate about that. It's different for different size clubs. So smaller size clubs might get more access to the players that we get because obviously how sort of in demand they are. So I think every football club has a unique fan base and a unique sort of selling point, so to speak, and we've got to use that to benefit young people. Thinking back to my time in education within secondary school, I didn't have any exposure to a football club or a rugby club, and would have loved that opportunity, and it would have inspired me. So to try and get organisations like ours to benefit young people and to develop relationships and give them a sense of belonging to a football club only has benefits.
I was just to show you how old I am, I was actually at St James's Park in 1968, the day that City won the first division, actually at Newcastle that day. So,
seriously?
Seriously.
Sorry about that.
Very good, Miriam.
Thank you. Jonathan, you mentioned that some of your funding comes from the Premier League, which is fantastic. I hear they have cash to spare. Where does the rest of your funding come from? And is it secure, the funding model?
So the rest of the funding comes from schools. And no, it's not secure. Obviously, a change in leadership at a school can change a sense of what they want to achieve. And, obviously schools are governed by results. So if a school's struggling with results and a change of leadership, that risk of taking students out for, a day a week and investing what is £7,000 from each school into what we offer is a big risk when there's other priorities, and obviously budgets are tight within schools. So I wouldn't say it's secure, but which is sort of enhances the reason for us to develop evidence of these sort of figures. Like we're currently looking with our sort of monitoring and evaluation team now in looking at the sort of the cost per student, avoiding sort of exclusion. So if a student gets permanently excluded, the cost that has to the school and community compared to, we work with numerous students who are on the sort of level of being permanently excluded, and we prevent that and provide them with the tools to succeed and be a positive role model within their school, which immediately pays for everything else that comes that academic year. It's just evidencing that is quite tough, because how would you know someone was about to be permanently excluded? Well, there's only a certain amount of people in the school that know, and they usually don't make big decisions such as spending X amount of money on a provision. So in terms of the balance of funding, what proportion did the Premier League pay for your basic setup, your admin cost, staffing, and then schools kind of pay a fee for the number of children that they enrol on the programme? So it depends how much you want to grow and reach out. So we could work with a small number of schools and just use the Premier League funding, for example, a really small number of schools. But we really want to widen the reach across Greater Manchester, so we've stretched that. And a lot of Premier League foundations have come to us to say, how do you charge? Because obviously, once you're not charging for a provision, then starting to charge money, schools are quick to say, no, we've had this for free, we're not going to do it. So we're in numerous conversations now with and as was mentioned before, there's a pull with Manchester City, so we're in probably an advantageous position there. But we stretch that so it's more, the schools pay around 80% compared to what the Premier League funding stretches to for Inspires. It's different at different programmes, but for City Inspires, the schools pay more. Just because we really want to keep widening that reach. We've got 6 full-time coaches now across 25 days, and there's so many more schools that could do with this support and provision. So we're going to keep stretching that funding and begging the Premier League to help us.
Sounds good. Thank you. And Nathan, could you describe your funding model as well and whether or not it's secure? Yes, it's quite similar in a way that we ask schools to cover 50% of the costs, which is 30,000 for the whole year, and we ask them to cover around 50% of that. And that actually forms 40% of our total organisational income, so that's a huge kind of risk to us if schools can no longer pay. We tried, just on the point on charging schools, we always charge schools. We found that initially when we didn't charge, or if we found funding from elsewhere and didn't charge schools, we never got the same buy-in.
And the programme didn't work in schools where we went in for free. So our thing, I mean, we've recent conversations with head teachers across the country recently, because we've now renegotiated for next academic year. But one of them said to us, kind of, my choice as a head teacher is getting a new LSA or your programme, basically. And he chose our programme. But, you know, it's that I think it's not based on the evidence.
So where does the other 70% of your funding come?
So that's through a mixture of grant and corporate income.
Okay.
We have to get so
business sponsorship and things like that.
And our own fundraising. So that's for, you know, a big part of our jobs as non-delivery staff is going out to business, to individuals, to help us raise money, basically. That's what we're doing a lot of the time.
Your geographical footprint, is that?
So it's sort of Glasgow, where loads of the sort of biggest collection of schools is around Cardiff and the valleys, obviously with rugby being the main sport there, but also this huge level of deprivation. We've actually got the least amount of schools in London. I've found London to be the most competitive in terms of external interventions for schools. So everyone we've talked to have got either other people coming in, or they've got a range of interventions. So we've actually grown loads in Hertfordshire, for example, where we found there's just no competition. There's not anyone doing what we're doing. So I think there's scope to do more in those types of areas outside or slightly outside of the big cities.
Interesting.
Thank you.
And what approach should the government take to roll out sports-based attendance interventions more widely? Obviously, we've seen the welcome news recently of a multi-year funding settlement for the first time in terms of the PE and sports premium. But is there more that you think could be done on the fringes of the school day? Flick's talked about extending the school day and that side of things, that you think could make a difference in terms of children's attendance?
Yeah, I think there's this real untapped potential of community sports clubs being not used in the school day, and only a lot of the time used in the evenings and the weekends, so rugby clubs, football clubs, cricket clubs, etc. And for the ones I've come across, a lot of them really want to help the local schools but can't get in to work with them. So I think there's a real opportunity for something that's low or zero cost to bring more sport, and there's a value in doing it off-site. We predominantly do it on-site, but there's a value to do that off-site as well. It's just about kind of connecting those, and schools are hard to get into. They're hard to work with initially, so it's kind of making that easier as well.
Any thoughts on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, it's obviously the investment in getting behind such programmes, such organisations that are successful in this area, and really championing what we're looking to achieve, and everyone's looking to achieve the same thing in sort of bettering outcomes for young people and the wider communities. And then having a real focus on gathering the evidence, because it's not until you put that evidence in front of a school leader that they then become straight away invested in it. They don't get access to the programme. They're obviously too high up to see the day-to-day yet. We need some investment in terms of putting what they want to read in terms of the attendance figures, the exclusion figures, the pro-social behaviours, like everything data-wise that they can go, right, this is benefiting each young person, which is having an impact overall on the school.
And Nathan, you started by giving us a good sort of scientific overview of some of the benefits of physical activity and sporting activity for young people, and how that helps them to switch on, pay attention, and be in a better mood. Are there any elements you think from these sports-based programmes that schools could take and learn from in order to support their internal approach to attendance?
Yes, I think we... sorry, Jonathan. When you talk about sport initially, you're thinking about going to the playing field or the plains, but actually you can integrate sports or sporting activities into the classroom. So you could do something that's kind of with beanbags or something like that. We found if we're teaching a classroom intervention, pupils really can't hold attention for more than 20 minutes. So they need a physical energizer. So that's something that we have begun to train teachers on, is how to integrate sporting activity into day-to-day. This sense of fun is something that pupils seem to be missing a lot in life in general. So if that classroom environment can have an element of fun that's still boundaried, that is really engaging for pupils. But the main thing for us is that relationship. So we really appreciate the teachers' time is kind of limited in terms of that relationship within that setting. But we kind of work with the young person to empower them to be aware of their needs in that classroom environment, and that's something we teach teachers as well, to try and see behind the behaviour and try and take as much as possible a non-punitive approach in terms of changing that behaviour, because all that behaviour is sort of communication. So.
And from your end, Jonathan, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I have to emphasise that relationship piece. So we use that as a real opportunity to be successful. The fact that obviously teachers will have 30 students for maybe 2 hours a week. It's hard to even know the second name within that time, where we can really invest in these young people to the point where they know. So we'll have a lot of students who quite resistant to support, who'll go, all right, I need you to stop caring now, which we're at. Well, that's an absolute win. So basically, you've not had enough adults in your life to care about you, so it feels strange for us to do that. So it's making sure there's enough staff or enough time for staff to really invest in getting to know the young person on a personal level, their interests, their hobbies, whatever you can do, so that they invest in you, because that's what they do when they know that you're invested in them. They've got a responsibility towards you, so they'll always apologise, our students, for misbehaving across school because they feel like they've let us down, which they haven't, but we've created that sense of appreciation and responsibility that probably isn't able to be created across school. And then the other one that I'd like to mention is that students within our provision don't feel the stress of feeling pressured by results. Like if they do well, great. If you don't, we try again and we go again. And naturally across secondary schools, there's a pressure that's put on teachers that then, whether they like it or not, is then put on the students, which can create challenging learning environments. And I feel that's why a lot of students enjoy being with us, because there's not that level of stress, and we understand that there's not a lot that can be done, but if they can be mindful of that, teachers, we always quite have open conversations about this in terms of being mindful of that. The learning environment's a much more positive one. And then again, just creating safe spaces for students to talk freely, having their opinions, like I said, making sure they're heard and thought of within education, we find gets the buy-in for young people and makes them want to return to what we do.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for your evidence. Very much appreciated. I will say order.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.